64 years ago, a young woman in Athens, Ohio, vanished without a trace after leaving home to meet her ex-husband at the family-owned auto garage, leaving behind a devastated family in shock and confusion. Authorities at the time suspected the husband, a respected local businessman, but with no body, no evidence of a crime, and no leads, the investigation eventually went cold. Yet for more than half a century, the file remained in the Ohio State Archives, and a cold case unit never stopped believing the truth was still out there waiting to be found. Then in 2013, during a highway expansion project, workers uncovered a strange object buried beneath an old layer of concrete, a seemingly small detail that was enough to reopen the entire case. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you love real-life cases like this, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes. June 1961. Ohio was enjoying a calm post-war period. The local industrial economy was growing slowly but steadily. The town of Athens sat among the low hills of southeastern Ohio, its population mostly workers, mechanics, teachers, and small shop owners. Mornings here began with the sound of school bus horns and the smell of coffee drifting through narrow streets. Faded painted wooden houses, porches with swinging chairs, lace curtains softening the sunlight. Everything carried the peaceful air of an ordinary small town. In that setting, 27-year-old Charlotte Moore lived with her mother in a small house on Maple Street. She worked as an accounting secretary for a construction company and was known as gentle and reserved. 6 years earlier, Charlotte had married Daniel Moore, owner of Moore Motors car dealership, a man nearly 10 years her senior. The marriage started out smoothly, but 3 years in, conflicts arose over work, money, and Daniel's controlling habits. By early 1961, they had separated. Daniel moved into the apartment behind the dealership, while Charlotte returned to live with her mother. In June, they agreed to finalize the divorce, and on Wednesday morning, Charlotte agreed to meet Daniel to discuss property and vehicle division. Around 8 o'clock on June 14th, neighbors saw Charlotte leave the house wearing a light blue dress, her hair neatly pulled up, carrying a purse and car keys. She got into the silver 1959 Chevy Impala that Daniel had bought her, started the engine, and drove off Maple Street. One neighbor clearly remembered her turning to look back, smiling and waving, before the car disappeared toward downtown and Moore Motors. After that, no one ever saw Charlotte again. By noon, the phone at her house rang repeatedly with no answer. By afternoon, her mother grew worried, calling Charlotte's friends at the office and beauty salon. Everyone said they hadn't seen her since morning. As night fell, Irene and her son drove along Route 33 and the industrial area near the Hocking River, stopping at gas stations and stores. No one had seen the silver Chevy. They returned home around 9 p.m. The porch light was still on, the kitchen cold, no sign Charlotte had come back. At that point, Irene picked up the phone and called the Athens County Sheriff's Office. Her voice shaking, she reported that her daughter had left the house that morning, left no note, took no clothes or documents, and no one knew where she was. On the other end, the duty officer logged the call as an adult missing person report and immediately forwarded it to Sheriff Joe Simmons, who was in the office with investigator Ray Coleman. They checked accident, hospital, and traffic incident logs for the day. Nothing matched the description. Simmons opened a new file, assigned temporary code MP0761 on Form MP01, and left headquarters with Coleman. The sheriff's black Plymouth turned onto quiet streets and stopped in front of the little house on Maple. The porch light was still on. Irene and her son were waiting at the door. The officers introduced themselves, asked everyone to stay calm, and began taking statements. According to Irene, Charlotte left at 8 a.m. wearing a light blue dress, carrying a small purse, driving the silver Chevy Impala. She said she was going to meet her ex-husband Daniel Moore at Moore Motors and had not been in contact since. Police walked through the house, checking the bedroom, closets, desk, personal papers, savings book, spare wallet, all still in the drawers, no indication she had planned to leave town. Coleman wrote in his notebook, "No luggage, no withdrawal, domestic appointment." Simmons asked about Charlotte's relationship with Daniel. Irene said they had been separated over 6 months, and that recently Daniel had been calling repeatedly, wanting to meet about property division. Simmons noted recent contact with spouse, potential risk. After statements were taken, Coleman contacted hospitals and emergency rooms around Athens with a detailed description: female, 27, light brown hair, 5'4", approx. 115 pounds, wearing light blue dress. No matching patients. They then called motels, hotels, and gas stations along the main routes. No record of the silver Chevy. Simmons told Coleman to phone More Motors, but the line was busy. No one picked up. Charlotte's brother confirmed he had already searched town, along the highway and industrial areas, with no trace. Her mother repeated that Charlotte always let the family know if she would be out overnight. Near 11 p.m., Simmons sat in the living room, writing the report, assessing the situation as adult female, missing 13 hours, last contact husband. In the comments section of Form MP01, he wrote by hand, "High-risk case, possible domestic involvement." Coleman drew up a list of locations to search: Maple Street route, Main Street, More Motors area, Riverside parking lots, near the Hocking, and several old industrial sites to the south. They agreed to mobilize 2 patrol teams at dawn. Before leaving, Simmons told Irene to keep the phone nearby and not leave the house in case Charlotte called, and gave her the sheriff's office hotline number. Outside, fog was thickening. The patrol car pulled away from Maple Street as the clock struck midnight, leaving the house in total silence. Back at headquarters, Simmons placed file MP0761 on top of the stack with a red paper clip and handwritten note. Adult female, high risk missing. Field search, scheduled at 6 o'clock. In the office, lit only by a desk lamp and the hum of a fan, those words lay quietly on the desk, marking the official start of a missing person case in Athens, Ohio. Dawn was just breaking, fog still blanketing the fields around Athens, when the 2 county sheriff patrol teams received orders to move out. The search plan approved the night before split them into 2 directions. One team would canvass the residential area from Maple Street to downtown. The second would head south along Route 33 through the old industrial zone and roadside gas stations. Sheriff Joe Simmons directed operations by radio, ordering detailed notes of anything unusual. Before 7 a.m., the first checkpoints reported no vehicle or items matching the Chevy Impala file. Downtown, Officer Greer's team stopped at the post office and asked the morning staff. No one had seen a matching woman or car. They continued to the bus depot and restaurants along the main strip. Same result. Meanwhile, the southern team, led by Deputy Lane, drove the old industrial road lined with empty warehouses and garages. At 8:25 a.m., Lane stopped at the Riverbend gas station about 2 miles from downtown. Owner Harold Dixon stated that the previous morning around 8:30, he saw a silver Chevy parked near More Motors, roughly 300 yards from his pumps. Dixon remembered the plate because he had serviced Daniel Moore's vehicles before, and was certain it was Charlotte's car. Lane wrote down the statement, cross-checked the description, then radioed Simmons, possible vehicle sighted near More Motors. Simmons immediately ordered Team 2 to that location. The access road to the dealership was narrow and muddy, flanked by old brick walls and abandoned buildings. Just before 9 a.m. they arrived and spotted a silver car parked motionless in the alley behind More Motors. Even from a distance, the rear end matched the description. Police stopped their patrol car about 30 feet away, killed the engine, and approached slowly. The license plate was an exact match, 4M7286. Doors were closed, windshield lightly dusted, tires caked with dried mud. Lane scanned the area, no other people, no signs of collision or theft. He logged discovery time 8:56, location rear alley of More Motors, then radioed Simmons directly. Report transmitted, vehicle located unoccupied, condition undisturbed. Simmons ordered the scene frozen. No doors opened, nothing moved. Lane strung reflective tape across both ends of the alley, blocking access, and wrote a brief initial condition report. Locked, no lights on, silent, empty. 2 other officers photographed the overall scene, measured distance from rear bumper to garage wall. Approximately 10 feet. 1 officer stayed to guard, the other returned to headquarters. At 9:15 a.m., Simmons wrote in the command log, "Suspect vehicle confirmed. Investigation team to be dispatched." Inside the patrol car, the Athens map lay open with a red circle around Moore Motors. The first concrete point in the official search for Charlotte Moore. Around 9:30 a.m., after receiving confirmation of the vehicle location, Sheriff Joe Simmons and investigator Ray Coleman left headquarters and drove straight to the alley behind Moore Motors. The fog had lifted, early sunlight slanted between low buildings, the pavement still damp. When they arrived, 2 patrol cars blocked both ends of the alley, 1 officer on guard, another writing reports. The silver Chevy Impala sat against the west brick wall, about 10 feet from the dealership's rear door, rear end facing the street. Simmons ordered all activity stopped, and a 20-meter perimeter set with wooden stakes and reflective cordon tape to preserve the scene. Coleman noted the time 9:42 a.m., scene secured. After the safety perimeter was established, Simmons began a general survey. The alley was narrow, gravel and cement surface, many old tire tracks but no skid or hard brake marks. Brick walls dusty, no handprints or scrape marks. Car windows closed, reflecting weak light. The alley was quiet except for distant engine noise. Weather conditions logged, clear sky, approx. 74 degrees Fahrenheit, light northeast breeze, average humidity. Coleman measured with tape, nose of car to opposite wall. 2.8 m, rear bumper to dealership, wall 3.1 m. Car to main road edge approx. 8 m. All recorded on the scene diagram. A sheriff's photographer arrived with a Rolleiflex, took overall shots from 4 angles, then close-ups of plate, tires and ground behind the rear bumper. Simmons ordered careful search of surroundings for footprints, debris, or dropped items. 2 officers swept every square meter, only old oil stains and discarded cigarette butts found. Coleman noted, no signs of forced entry, no sign of struggle. Bodywork showed no fresh scratches, paint intact, door handles clean. Through the glass, the purse was visible on the passenger seat. Nothing appeared disturbed. Police did not open doors to preserve evidence. Simmons walked the perimeter one last time, noted the locked steel rear door of Moore Motors with no pry marks. He closed his notebook, ordered Coleman to finalize the preliminary scene report with photographs for temporary filing. Report numbered Scene 1. Vehicle location 9:58 a.m. Simmons then contacted the Athens County Identification Unit, requesting technicians for fingerprint and surface sampling. Area sealed. Do not enter. Active scene. Signs posted. 2 officers assigned 24-hour guard, 1 at each end of the alley, to prevent public or dealership staff access. In the on-site duty log, Simmons wrote the final line. Preliminary scene inspection complete, awaiting identification unit. As he closed the book, the sun was higher, glinting off the dusty pavement. The silver Chevy sat motionless, gleaming harshly in the narrow, silent alley behind the industrial row in Athens. The request for technical assistance was sent that same morning, and by 11:15 a.m., the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, BCI in Columbus, confirmed receipt from the Athens County Sheriff's Office. Per federal protocol, BCI dispatched 2 field technicians, David Larkin, surface trace specialist, and Thomas Reed, biological samples, in a specialized van carrying standard kit. 35 mm camera, portable microscope, fingerprint powder, and evidence containers. Upon arrival, the area was fully secured exactly as Sheriff Simmons had reported. The silver Chevy Impala remained untouched, surrounded by reflective tape, 2 officers standing watch. Larkin presented credentials, checked scene seals, then opened his kit and began collection. Simmons noted handover time and signed the temporary transfer of control form to BCI. Reed photographed the overall scene with a Nikon, then close-ups of oil stains, tires, pavement, door handles. They measured every point, marking with grease pencil on the scene diagram. Soil under the chassis was sampled first, 3 locations, 2 small scoops each, sealed in glass vials, labeled sample A1 to A3. Larkin collected oil residue behind the rear bumper using absorbent paper, sealed in vapor-proof bags. Near the brick wall, he located a faint men's size 10 shoe print, pointing toward the dealership rear door. The print was photographed, measured 29.2 centimeters long, 10.6 centimeters wide, then dusted with carbon powder for a cast. Near the right front wheel, Reed found a 2.7 centimeters piece of blue fabric caught on the door edge. He removed it with tweezers and placed it in marked envelope fabric. When the driver door handle crevice, they recovered 1 short light brown curled hair stuck to the paint. Reed lifted it with metal tweezers, avoiding bare hand contact, and sealed it in a small vial. They then used fluorescent powder and UV light to develop latent prints on doors and windows. 4 clear prints located, 3 on driver door, 1 on rear glass. All photographed and lifted with adhesive tape onto evidence cards. Simmons observed from outside the tape, taking parallel notes. By 1 p.m. collection was complete. Larkin compiled the full evidence list, coded Exhibit 114, including soil, oil, shoe print, fabric, hair, fingerprints, and scene photos. Everything sealed in a BCI serialized metal case. Reed and Larkin signed the evidence log sheet, noting time, location, collector, and supervisor. Simmons signed as witness officer. Transfer forms duplicated, 1 kept by the sheriff's office, 1 traveling with the evidence. At 1:25 p.m. the BCI van departed for Columbus, carrying all samples to the central laboratory for physical and biological testing. Simmons noted in the day-end report, evidence collected under BCI supervision, transfer completed, awaiting lab analysis. After the BCI van left, the scene remained cordoned. Guards continued through the evening shift. In the duty log, the sheriff's final entry was short and in bold black ink. Case MP0761, reclassified as possible foul play. That afternoon, after the evidence collection report was transferred back to Columbus, Sheriff Simmons and Investigator Coleman began reviewing the employee list from Moore Motors to take statements. The list included 8 people, 4 mechanics, 2 salesmen, 1 accountant, and 1 manager. They were summoned one by one to the county sheriff's office that afternoon for questioning. The first witness, Frank Heller, a mechanic working in the rear repair bay, confirmed he had seen Charlotte Moore around 8:15 a.m. the previous day. He remembered her arriving with Daniel Moore. Both walked into the main office of the dealership. Frank said they talked for about 10 minutes, then he got busy back in the garage and didn't notice when they left. When asked further about the mood between them, Frank paused for a few seconds before answering that he hadn't heard anything unusual, but he did notice Daniel seemed more tense than usual. Simmons noted, Charlotte confirmed present, observed by Heller, 8:15 a.m. The second witness was Mary Duvall, the accountant who handled the sales ledger. She stated that Daniel had come into the office at 8:30 that morning, carrying a stack of files, and told everyone not to disturb him because he had a private discussion. Half an hour later, she heard a door slam hard and a thud, like something falling. When Simmons asked if she heard voices, she replied quietly, "I think there was a woman's voice, a little loud, but I couldn't tell where it came from. Maybe from the garage area." Coleman marked, possible argument, female voice, around 8:45. The third employee, Jack Reynolds, who managed the parts storeroom, said that shortly before 9 o'clock, he went out to the back lot to smoke and saw the silver Chevy parked in the alley, doors closed, nobody inside. He remembered it clearly because that car didn't usually park there. Jack also added that he never saw Charlotte walk out the gate or leave the premises during the roughly 20 minutes he was outside. When he went back in, the car was still in the same spot. Simmons asked him to be precise about timing and distance, then wrote, "Vehicle observed unoccupied, 8:55, 9:10. The other two mechanics, Carl Dent and Mike Pearson, both confirmed Daniel was in the garage that morning, working normally, but neither saw Charlotte. Carl recalled hearing the metal door slam hard around 9 o'clock and thought Daniel was putting tools away. None of them saw any woman leave the dealership. Coleman compiled the statements and built a timeline. Charlotte arrived 8:15, possible argument, 8:40, 8:45, car seen empty, 8:55. This data was added to the master report, establishing the last known time Charlotte was seen alive. Simmons and Coleman returned to Moore Motors to re-examine the rear exit route and question the security guard at the adjacent industrial lot. The gate guard, Earl Bishop, said he had seen Daniel drive the small pickup out the back gate alone around 10 o'clock that morning and return close to noon. When asked if Charlotte was with him, he answered firmly, "No." Simmons noted, "Daniel alone departure, 10 a.m., and ordered full transcripts of all statements. By late afternoon, the summary report was complete. Charlotte Moore was present at Moore Motors on the morning of June 14th, confirmed by at least 3 witnesses. Last sighting around 8:45, after which no one saw her leave the premises in any direction. Her personal vehicle was found abandoned behind the garage with no signs of having been moved. In his private notes, Simmons wrote a preliminary conclusion in small, careful handwriting. Subject last seen inside premises. Probable incident occurred between 8:30, 9 o'clock HRS. The next morning, after finishing statements from all dealership employees, Sheriff Joe Simmons signed a formal summons for Daniel Moore to appear at the Athens County Sheriff's Office for official interrogation. At 10 o'clock, Daniel arrived wearing a white dress shirt, gray slacks, and polished black shoes, calm in posture but tense in the face. He was led into the small interview room where only Simmons and investigator Ray Coleman were present. On the table lay the summary of witness statements, crime scene photos, and the BCI evidence report. Simmons began with basic questions, exact time and purpose of the meeting with Charlotte on the morning of June 14th. Daniel stated that Charlotte arrived at Moore Motors around 8:15 a.m. by prior arrangement to discuss divorce proceedings, specifically the transfer of ownership of the Chevy Impala. He said the conversation in the office lasted about 20 minutes, tone normal, no argument. Afterward, Charlotte left, and he didn't know where she went next. When Coleman asked if anyone else saw her leave the dealership, Daniel replied that the employees were all in the repair area and he wasn't paying attention. Police showed him photos of the silver Chevy found behind the garage. Daniel looked for a moment and said, "She might have left the car and had someone pick her up." "I don't know." Simmons asked him to state precisely the last moment he saw Charlotte. Daniel answered, "Around 8:40, she walked out of the office, and I went back to check files." The statement was fully recorded, and Coleman initialed the bottom of the page. While the interview continued, 2 other officers conducted a field check around the Moore Motors garage to verify details Daniel provided. The concrete surface behind the shop still showed a darker damp patch, with a strong smell of industrial oil despite open vents. A BCI technician on site documented the patch, photographed the floor, measured relative humidity, then sealed a small sample in an evidence bag. Simmons received the preliminary report while the interview was still underway. He asked Daniel about the freshly poured concrete. Daniel replied briefly, "I had it patched to cover cracks. It was done early this week." When pressed for the exact day, he said he didn't remember precisely, probably Monday. Coleman noted fresh cement surface, inconsistent timeline. They continued questioning his schedule that morning. Daniel said he left the garage around 10 o'clock in the small pickup to pick up parts and return near noon. When Simmons asked who could confirm that, he said the parts clerk or delivery driver could be asked. The entire interview was recorded and signed. After nearly 2 hours, Simmons ended the session, read the transcript aloud, and asked Daniel to review and sign it. Daniel signed in full, raised no objections, and remained calm. Before leaving the room, he asked briefly, "Can I go now?" Simmons replied that there were currently no grounds to hold him, and the investigation was ongoing. Daniel was allowed to leave, but instructed not to leave Athens County for 3 days pending further verification. As he walked out, Coleman watched through the window and added a line to his notebook: "Subject calm, cooperative, no visible distress." Simmons stood quietly in front of the wall map, where he had marked in red ink the location of the car, the garage, and the route out of town. The only 3 points currently connected in Charlotte Moore's disappearance. The following morning, based on the interview results and field reports, Sheriff Joe Simmons filed an application with the Athens County Court for a search warrant covering all property owned by Daniel Moore, including his residence on Pine Street and the Moore Motors garage. The warrant was signed at 9:30 a.m. by Judge Harold Benton, authorizing seizure of any items or samples potentially related to Charlotte Moore's disappearance. Simmons and investigator Ray Coleman led the execution team, accompanied by 2 Identification Bureau technicians and a representative from the state prosecutor's office as witness. The first stop was Daniel's house, a simple 2-story home at the end of the street where he had lived alone since the separation. When Simmons read the warrant, Daniel remained calm and let them in. Police searched room by room, starting on the ground floor. The kitchen was tidy, the refrigerator stocked, nothing unusual. Upstairs, in the desk drawer of the master bedroom, they found a 6-inch fixed-blade hunting knife with a brown wooden handle and slight blade discoloration. Next to it was a pair of gray leather gloves with a few shiny black streaks. Both were bagged. Coleman noted, "Knife and gloves collected, desk, master room." In the closet was an oil-stained coverall with a strong chemical smell. Daniel explained it was work clothing from the garage. Everything was photographed and tagged. After finishing the residence, the team moved to Moore Motors. The garage sat on the edge of town, consisting of a small showroom, office, and rear repair shop. Simmons ordered the area sealed and employees to stop work. The rear metal door was opened with a key Daniel provided. Inside, the concrete floor still showed a color difference, and the air smelled of oil and fresh paint. A metal drum nearly 5 feet tall stood in the corner, half full of dry cement, half containing wet residue. Technicians took cement samples and sealed them in glass vials. The tool bench area was sprayed with luminol for blood, negative. Simmons closely examined the floor and saw only a few dried oil streaks. Coleman measured moisture with a probe and recorded unusually high levels, consistent with recent pouring. In another corner, a plastic bucket labeled June 14th, in unclear handwriting, contained waste oil. A sample was drawn into a tube and labeled Sample D3. All items in the area were inventoried: knife, gloves, cement drum, oil-stained clothing, waste oil bucket, cement samples, empty metal drum, 12 items total. Each was numbered, photographed, and sealed with BCI tape. Daniel was asked to sign acknowledgement that the seizure followed the warrant. He signed without protest. Identification Bureau technicians lifted prints from the desk, door handles, and oil drum lid. All matched Daniel's known prints. Simmons requested copies of Moore Motors accounting records and supply invoices for the first week of June, especially anything related to cement and industrial oil. Coleman packaged the ledgers under Code Document Set 1. When the search concluded, the report was read aloud to the team. Completion time 2:40 p.m. Simmons signed. Search executed under warrant. Items secured. All evidence was sealed in 3 metal cases numbered 1347, 1348, and 1349. Transported in a dedicated vehicle to headquarters for temporary storage before transfer to the lab. Daniel was allowed to leave the garage without escort, but was told to remain available for further cooperation. As the team left the industrial park, Simmons looked back at the old brick building and closed metal door, writing the final line in his investigation notebook. Garage search complete. No direct trace of victim. Evidence secured under Code MP0761. 3 days after the search concluded, the samples and evidence collected from the house and Moore Motors garage were delivered to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation Laboratory in Columbus for analysis. Transport docket BCI 1961-214 was handed over directly by technician Thomas Reed. Testing took 48 hours and included chemical, spectroscopic, and physical comparison against Moore Motors' baseline records. On June 19, 1961, the official report was sent to the Athens County Sheriff's Office, containing 5 detailed sections. Section 1. The light brown substance found on the rear garage concrete tested weakly positive for hemoglobin with benzidine reagent. Blood typing confirmed Group B, matching Charlotte Moore's medical records. However, the sample quantity was too small for individual identification. BCI noted trace sample, group match only. Section 2. Waste oil from the plastic bucket was standard SAE-40 industrial oil used by Moore Motors for vehicle servicing. Additives and impurities matched the dealership's stock, no unusual compounds. Section 3. Cement drum showed fresh lime and oil residue mixed in, indicating the batch was poured less than 48 hours before the search. Microscopic exam found no hair, tissue, or biological material. Section 4. The hunting knife and leather gloves from Daniel's house, blade showed old dark staining, but tested negative for blood reagents. Gloves had only machine oil and metal dust, no biological traces. Section 5. Fabric fibers and hair from the car door handle, compared to control samples from Charlotte's belongings, color and structure, consistent. But due to light exposure and time degradation, recorded as consistent, but not conclusive. At the end of the report, Chief Forensic Pathologist John C. Harrow summarized, no evidence of violent act confirmed. Material findings, limited to presence of Group B blood trace and matching oil compound. Physical evidence remains circumstantial, insufficient for indictment. A copy was sent to Sheriff Simmons with a handwritten note from Harrow recommending collection of fresh samples if new traces were located, due to high degradation in the garage environment. Simmons read every line carefully, lingered on the final conclusion, then closed the file. Although the results did not disprove a confrontation at Moore Motors, they were insufficient to charge Daniel Moore or anyone else. In his summary to the Athens County prosecutor, Simmons quoted the BCI conclusion verbatim. The last line centered and typed, "Physical evidence circumstantial, insufficient for indictment." After receiving the BCI lab results, Sheriff Joe Simmons held an emergency meeting at the Athens County Sheriff's Office to assess the situation and decide next steps. The conclusion, physical evidence circumstantial, insufficient for indictment, stalled the case, but the blood group match and Charlotte's prolonged absence compelled authorities to expand the search. On June 21, 1961, a large-scale search plan was approved, covering a 15-mile radius centered on Moore Motors and surrounding areas. 3 priority zones were selected: the Hocking River south of town, Hickory Forest east of the outskirts, and the abandoned Athens Mine No. 2 to the northwest. At 6 a.m., 2 coordinated search teams consisting of county deputies, volunteers, and rescue units were mobilized. A specialized truck brought 2 K9 tracking dogs, Rex and Lobo, from the Columbus unit, trained for open-terrain human scent. The first zone was the Hocking River bank, reedy, muddy, slow-moving water. Teams split, one along the east bank, one along the west. Officers walked in a skirmish line, holding probing sticks and anchor ropes to avoid sinking. Rex led, nose to the ground, occasionally barking softly, then pausing, but no significant finds. After 3 hours, they recovered only trash, a broken plastic piece, a rusted soda can, and a small light blue fabric scrap caught on riverside branches. Coleman retrieved the fabric with tweezers, placed it in a bag, and noted, "Found at Hocking River, East Bank, 10:45 a.m. Back at the rally point, Simmons compared it to family photos of Charlotte's dress. Color and weave appeared nearly identical. He ordered the sample sealed and sent to BCI for fiber analysis. By noon, the second team moved to Hickory Forest, dense oak and maple, many old trails. The dogs continued, but wind shifts hampered tracking. Several damp soil spots were flagged, yet nothing specific was located. The metal detector team, led by Deputy Sheriff Lane, along trail edges, found only rusted scrap and old shell casings, likely left by hunters. In the afternoon, the final zone, Athens Mine Number 2, closed since the 1940s, was checked. The entrance was boarded, but Simmons authorized temporary opening of a small section for a 10-meter interior sweep. Cold, dusty air, flashlight beams revealed only bat droppings and old coal streaks. Technicians documented coordinates, then the barrier was resecured. On the return route, the northern group stopped at a shallow swamp near town limits and dragged the muddy bottom with floats, still nothing relevant. As evening approached, all units regrouped at the Hocking River starting point. Simmons tallied results: 42 square miles searched, 16 manpower hours, no trace of the missing person, only one light blue fabric sample pending analysis. A preliminary report was drafted the same day, no remains located, one fabric sample under analysis. The fabric was transported to BCI Columbus that night, with signatures from Simmons, Lane, and Coleman. In his investigation log, Simmons wrote briefly, "Extended field search completed, area cleared, material trace pending verification." With that entry, the Athens map was folded. The red circles around the river, forest, and mine were now marked complete. But the blank space bearing Charlotte Moore's name remained unanswered. 3 days after the large-scale search ended, the fabric sample from the Hocking River bank was returned with the BCI Columbus analysis. Results stated, rayon cotton blend, light blue dye, identical to common women's dress fabric of the early 1960s. No blood, no skin cells, no unique identifiers. Conclusion: cannot confirm association with victim. Simmons read it, folded the report, and filed it. Thus, after nearly 2 weeks of investigation, no new witnesses appeared. No additional physical evidence beyond the earlier circumstantial samples. Repeated canvassing of Moore Motors and neighboring residences yielded nothing. Daniel Moore maintained outward cooperation, appearing when summoned, answering properly, showing no evasion. Surveillance of his movements the following week revealed no unusual activity. The case timeline froze at the morning of June 14th, between 8:30 and 9 a.m., when Charlotte was last seen at the garage. Since then, no one in Athens or surrounding areas had seen her again. Simmons and Coleman met multiple times with representatives of the Ohio State Prosecutor's Office in Columbus, presenting the full file, lab reports, scene photos, statements, and search records. Chief Prosecutor William Grady reviewed the materials for nearly 2 hours, then shook his head. Under current law, without a body or direct evidence of a crime, charges would not be accepted by the court. Grady stated clearly, the case is suspicious, not prosecutable. An official memo was sent to the Athens County Sheriff's Office confirming no sufficient grounds for indictment. In his June 28 report, Simmons wrote, physical traces inconclusive, no body recovered, no witnesses. Investigation suspended pending further evidence. He ordered all equipment withdrawn, the Moore Motors scene unsealed, and keys returned to the owner per procedure. The reflective barricade tape was removed. White paint marks on the pavement, indicating the car's position, were cleaned off. File MP-0761 remained in the commander's desk drawer, now dozens of pages thicker with copies and photos. Coleman continued checking phone records, bank statements, and credit accounts. No transactions in Charlotte's name since the day she vanished. Statewide missing person bulletins were issued with detailed descriptions, but produced no leads. As weeks passed, local media attention faded. Short articles in the Athens Messenger were replaced by business and sports news. In early July, Simmons held a final internal briefing, concluding the case was temporarily stalled. He read aloud to the assembled officers, no probable cause to detain suspect, no corpus delicti found, case status, inactive. After the meeting, the team dispersed quietly. On Simmons's desk, the final report was stapled into the Charlotte Moore file, gray cover bearing a red unresolved label. That afternoon he stood at the window of headquarters, looking out at the quiet main street of Athens, sparse traffic, clear blue sky. Only the paperclip on the file lay motionless under the lamp, reflecting the thin lines of the signature he had just added. Investigation temporarily suspended, awaiting new evidence. On July 5, 1961, nearly 3 weeks after Charlotte Moore was reported missing, Athens County Sheriff Joe Simmons officially completed the final report closing the initial investigation phase. The file, coded MP0761, Final Report, was almost 90 pages thick and contained all search warrants, witness statements, crime scene photographs, BCI laboratory results, and search area maps. In his small second-floor office at headquarters, Simmons sat at his old Underwood typewriter and typed the concluding lines in the standard Ohio format. He began with the incident summary. On June 14, 1961, Charlotte Moore, age 27, resident of 47 Maple Street, was reported missing. Her personal vehicle, a silver Chevy Impala, was located unoccupied in the alley behind Moore Motors, Athens, Ohio. Multiple searches were conducted. The victim's whereabouts remain unknown. Next came the investigation summary. The last person known to have seen Charlotte Moore alive was her ex-husband Daniel Moore, owner of Moore Motors. Mr. Moore's statement confirms a meeting on the morning of June 14 inside the dealership premises, with no conflict reported, after which the victim left alone. This statement could not be independently corroborated. No direct evidence or physical proof of criminal activity exists. The final line of the official section he typed slowly, striving for neutral language. Conclusion: probable homicide, unresolved. After reviewing every document, Simmons stamped it, filed in red ink, and signed it. Copies were forwarded to the Athens County Prosecutor's Office, the Ohio Attorney General's office in Columbus, and the original was placed in the Sheriff's Department archives. Regarding physical evidence, Simmons directed Detective Ray Coleman to coordinate with the BCI representative to seal and transfer everything to the state central storage facility. The evidence inventory listed 14 items: hunting knife, leather gloves, oil-stained clothing, cement samples, oil samples, fabric fibers, hair, fingerprints, and all photographs and soil standards. Everything was packed into 3 metal lockers, officially sealed with the raised embossed seal of the Athens County Sheriff's Office. Inventory numbers: OBCI 1961, 1347 through 1349. Transfer took place on July 7, with a 3-party receipt signed by Simmons, BCI technician Thomas Reed, and state archivist Paul West. As the convoy pulled away from headquarters that morning, the Athens sky was overcast, and a hot wind off the Hocking River kicked up dust along the main road. Simmons stood on the front steps, watching them leave, holding the last copy of the receipt. Deep down, he felt the case was not truly closed, but procedure required him to stop there. That night, in his duty log, he wrote in dark blue ink, "All investigative avenues exhausted, case filed as unresolved probable homicide. Evidence transferred to state custody." Those few words marked the official end of the 1961 investigation into the disappearance of Charlotte Moore, closing almost 1 month of fruitless searching by the entire Athens County Sheriff's Office. In early 1962, after all, administrative procedures were completed and cross-checked with the state record system, the Charlotte Moore missing person case was recoded in the Central Archives under the new designation, C-6103, classified as missing person, cause undetermined. On February 12, 1962, Sheriff Joe Simmons received confirmation from the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation in Columbus that the file had been sealed. 1 microfilm copy placed in Vault 4, and the original paper file transferred to long-term state storage. All accompanying physical evidence, 3 metal lockers and 2 document boxes, was stored in Section D, Athens County, 1961 cases. The storage confirmation bore signatures from Simmons BCI technician Thomas Reed and Central Archives Director Paul West. On the cover, directly below the title Charlotte Moore, female, age 27, a red stamp read UN solved missing person, active file closed. After final handoff, Simmons sent the closing notice to the state prosecutor and local authorities, confirming that the Athens County Sheriff's Office no longer had authority to pursue the case absent new evidence. The matter officially became inactive, subject only to periodic review, along with other unsolved 1960s cases. Internally, the Charlotte Moore file was categorized as probable homicide. No body recovered, one of 8 open cases in the county at the time. Throughout 1962, no further reports or leads were received. The family gradually returned to normal life, while Moore Motors continued operating under Daniel Moore's management, though sales suffered due to persistent rumors. In early 1963, Simmons learned Daniel had sold the dealership and left Ohio, relocating to Prescott, Arizona, according to federal residency records. No one from the Athens County Sheriff's Office ever contacted him again. At the end of 1963, a routine review entry was added to file C-6103, typed in faded courier font. Case remains unsolved. Subject not located. Investigation dormant until further notice. From that point on, the gray folder sat untouched in the BCI Columbus archives, on a metal shelf with a yellowing label, among hundreds of similar unsolved cases from neighboring counties. On the last 1962 document, Simmons' signature remained clear beneath his only administrative note, filed under state custody, no further action required. In September 2013, more than half a century after the Charlotte Moore disappearance was closed, a crew from the Ohio Department of Transportation, widening Route 33 west of Athens, uncovered an unusual object buried deep beneath the old concrete road base. While an excavator removed deteriorated pavement, a cylindrical metal drum, approximately 1.5 meters tall and heavily rusted, appeared amid the dirt and broken concrete. Site supervisor, Robert Keener, immediately halted work and notified local law enforcement per safety protocol. The 1st Athens County Patrol Unit arrived at 1420, noting the drum was roughly 400 meters from the former Moore Motors lot, in an area that had been a construction waste dump in the 1960s. Recognizing the drum was intentionally buried and appeared sealed, officers established a 50-meter perimeter, erected temporary barricades, and stopped all heavy equipment. Sheriff David Hale, successor to the position once held by Simmons, arrived to oversee the scene. He ordered a discovery report, overall photographs, GPS coordinates, and an urgent notification to the Ohio BCI in Columbus. The initial report transmitted read, "Unidentified sealed drum. Possible hazardous content or evidence, located Route 33, Athens County." By 16 o'clock, the BCI forensics team acknowledged receipt and dispatched a mobile crime scene unit overnight. While awaiting their arrival, Athens deputies conducted preliminary safety checks. A local technician used a handheld gas detector. No flammable or radioactive gases were detected. The drum was encased in broken concrete, its thick steel lid heavily corroded, with faint remnants of old lettering reading, "Oil, industrial grade." Hale ordered a tarp, erected for weather protection, and authorized preliminary soil sampling. 3 soil samples were taken at 0.5 m, 1 m, and 2 m distances, sealed in glass vials, labeled soil sample, or 33A1 through A3. Simultaneously, technicians noted a faint oil odor escaping from a hairline crack in the lid, indicating liquid remained inside. A 10 centimeters gray-green fabric, scrap mixed with damp soil, and cement residue was recovered nearby. Placed in an evidence bag sealed as fabric fragment, adjacent to drum. All items were logged in the temporary evidence intake log, Route 33 site. By 1810, the area was illuminated by construction floodlights, and 2 deputies photographed the drum from every angle, measuring height 147 centimeters, diameter 60 centimeters. The lid rim showed circular indentations consistent with manual crimping, and the vent hole had been welded shut long ago. There were no obvious breaches, but extensive red rust indicated decades underground. At 19 o'clock, when the BCI team from Columbus arrived, Athens personnel formally transferred the scene via site transfer record. Lead technician Mark Hollis examined the drum and determined it met criteria for possible connection to an old case. He expanded the secured radius by 20 meters, added lighting tents and generators, and scheduled controlled excavation for the following morning. Soil, oil, and fabric samples were sealed on site and placed in BCI container 2013 AH-77 under supervision of Hale and the construction representative. The final entry for the day read, "Sealed drum located under concrete base during Route 33 expansion, scene secured, samples collected, awaiting excavation order." As personnel left that night, the floodlights still burned white over the oil-stained ground. Wind moved across the broken concrete, carrying the smell of old metal and oil through the Athens night, where a secret buried for over 50 years had just been awakened. On the morning of September 10, 2013, under the supervision of Sheriff David Hale and the BCI forensics team, the Ohio State Forensic Anthropology Unit began controlled excavation of the drum discovered on Route 33. The site was fully cordoned off and covered by a large evidence tent. Only authorized personnel were permitted inside. At 7:20, Dr. Andrew Foster, lead field forensic anthropologist, briefed the team and assigned duties. Surrounding concrete was cut by hand with specialized saws to avoid vibration damage. Soil was removed in 10 centimeters layers, with depth, GPS coordinates, and ambient temperature recorded at each stage. Technician Sarah Quinn documented the entire process in 3D using a Leica geosystem scanner. Each soil layer was screened for foreign material. At approximately 90 centimeters depth, the steel lid became fully exposed, heavily rusted but intact. Foster ordered panoramic photos and noted in the field log, "Top of sealed drum exposed, 9:42 a.m. Embossed lettering on the lid, though faint, was legible. Lot number 24B, 1960-62, matching the operational years of more motors. Once cleared, the drum was secured with lifting straps, and the welded lid was carefully cut with a small rotary saw to prevent pressure release. When the lid popped, a thick stench of old oil and metal filled the tent. Foster and Hollis shone lights inside. A 30 centimeters layer of dark liquid sat atop a solid gray mass mixed with dried cement. Surface liquid was vacuumed into container. Liquid sample, R33B1. As the liquid level dropped, the remaining contents revealed a porous cement-like block containing fabric fragments and small reflective metal objects. When Foster gently scraped with a trowel, a 25 centimeters long bone emerged, brittle and oil-stained. He immediately radioed, "Human remains located, approximate femur." The team switched to skeletal recovery protocol. White tarps were laid around the drum, and material was removed by hand into separate trays. Additional finds included 3 smaller bone fragments, a shattered skull piece, and multiple pale blue fabric scraps embedded in cement. All were photographed, measured, and numbered R33X01 through R33X09. At the drum bottom, amid sludge, Quinn recovered a small round metal object with tweezers, rinsed it with alcohol, revealing a thin necklace pendant engraved with the initials, CM, in simple block letters. It was close-up photographed and logged. Metal pendant, initials CM, recovered from bottom of drum. Foster prepared an on-site affidavit confirming the item's personal identification value. Upon completion, all remains were placed in biohazard-approved containers, sealed per Ohio forensic standards, and signed by Foster and Hale. The empty drum was craned out and loaded onto a BCI transport truck. The pit was dug an additional 20 centimeters to ensure nothing was missed, then temporarily backfilled, tarped, and marked with steel stakes reading Forensic Recovery Site. Route 33. At 15:10, Foster signed the excavation closure report, listing 23 total samples, 4 human bone samples, 7 soil, 5 fabric, 2 liquid, and 1 identification metal. The preliminary report to Columbus concluded, sealed drum recovered containing partial human remains, and personal item bearing initials CM. Probable forensic link to historical case. By late afternoon, the scene was cleared, leaving only a neat square hole beside the highway. Simmons was long gone, but his successors stood silently as the truck carrying the drum drove away, taking the first physical evidence in over half a century of the Athens disappearance everyone had forgotten. Following excavation, all remains and evidence from the Route 33 site were transported to the Ohio State Forensic Laboratory in Columbus. On the evening of September 10th, intake followed federal chain of custody standards with signatures from Dr. Andrew Foster, Sheriff David Hale, and BCI's Mark Hollis. Analysis began the next morning in the biology section. Bone fragments were cleaned in dilute enzyme solution, air-dried at controlled temperature, then moved to the DNA laboratory. Dr. Laura Chen, forensic anthropologist specializing in degraded remains, extracted mitochondrial DNA from marrow and pelvic bone, as those areas were least affected by oil and cement. Extraction occurred in a Class 3 sterile hood using high-speed centrifugation and proteinase K. Although concentration was low, sufficient mtDNA was amplified through multiple PCR rounds. The profile was saved as file 33HR 2013-1. Simultaneously, the forensics team coordinated with Athens County authorities to locate reference samples. Civil records showed Charlotte Moore had one daughter, Linda Moore, born 1956, currently residing in Cincinnati, Ohio. On September 14th, Linda was formally contacted and agreed to provide a comparison sample. Her buccal swab was collected and shipped overnight to Columbus. Dr. Chen's team sequenced the full HV1 and HV2 control regions and compared them to Linda's sample. After 3 independent runs, the sequences matched at all 16 diagnostic positions, yielding a 99.9% probability of mother-daughter relationship. Technical report 247 BCI Gen 13 stated, mitochondrial DNA extracted from skeletal remains recovered Route 33 identical to reference sample Linda Moore, indicating maternal relationship with probability 99.9%. Conclusion, remains identified as Charlotte Moore. Dr. Chen signed the identification. Anthropometric examination showed femur and pelvic measurements consistent with a female, approximately 162 centimeters tall, 54 kilograms, matching 1961 medical records. No antemortem fractures were present, but multiple bones displayed longitudinal stress cracks typical of post-mortem compression inside cement. Chemical analysis confirmed the oil coating the joints was SAE40, the exact grade used at Moore Motors. The CM pendant was analyzed by XRF spectroscopy, silver-nickel alloy manufactured 1958-1961, with hand-engraved lettering common to local jewelers. All findings were compiled into 78-page Forensic Report 2013 BCI FR44, delivered to the Athens County Sheriff's Office on September 18. The cover summary by Dr. Foster read, "Human remains conclusively identified as Charlotte Moore, missing since June 14, 1961. Evidence consistent with concealment in oil drum mixed with cement." Copies were sent to the Ohio Attorney General and BCI Central Registry for old file update. On September 19, 2013, Sheriff Hale signed the order reopening file C-6103 under new classification, homicide. Cold case document RSED 2013-91, attaching DNA results, photographs, evidence inventory, and excavation diagrams. In the BCI Columbus Master Ledger, the 1962 cover stamp, UN Solved Missing Person, active file closed received a new overlay label, case reopened under homicide classification. The following morning, an all-points bulletin went out statewide, announcing the Charlotte Moore case was now an active unsolved homicide. In Hale's final note that day he wrote, "Identification positive, 99.9%. Case C-6103, reopened as homicide. Cold case. Full reinvestigation authorized. Outside the Columbus Forensic Center, light rain fell, droplets collecting on the window overlooking the quiet streets, where an investigation forgotten for over 50 years was being revived by a string of cold but indisputable DNA numbers. Immediately after the DNA identification results were announced, and file C-6103 was reclassified as homicide. Cold case. Athens County Sheriff David Hale called an emergency meeting at the Athens County Sheriff's Office headquarters on the morning of September 20, 2013, to establish a task force for the reinvestigation of the Charlotte Moore case. The small second-floor conference room, where dusty old files were being reopened, now became the temporary command center. Hale headed the unit and personally oversaw strategic coordination. He selected Dr. Peter Lang, a forensic criminalist from BCI Columbus, as the technical advisor for biological evidence. Identification technician Julia Torres, who had previously handled the recovery of records from microfilm at the state archives, to analyze trace evidence and old physical items, and independent consultant Sarah Weller, a former Ohio state prosecutor, who had worked on more than 20 unsolved cases. The task force was designated Cold Case Unit C-6103 and given the objective of fully reviewing all physical evidence, documents, and witness statements while re-evaluating everything under modern forensic standards. That same day, Hale signed an order to transfer all 3 original evidence crates, which had been stored in the BCI warehouse since 1962, back to Athens for direct examination. When the metal crates were opened under Peter Lang's supervision, the old seals were intact. The red wax had faded, but the signature of Sheriff Simmons was still clearly visible. Items were carefully removed from each evidence bag: the hunting knife, the leather gloves, oil-stained clothing, cement samples, oil, fabric fibers, hair, fingerprint lifts, and the yellowed 1961 crime scene photographs. Julia Torres scanned everything with a high-resolution scanner to create digital copies and prevent damage from handling. Meanwhile, Lang examined each item under ultraviolet light and noted that preservation was better than expected. He requested additional swabbing from metal surfaces for possible residual DNA or trace evidence, especially on the knife and gloves. Sarah Weller sat at the corner of the table, reviewing a copy of Daniel Moore's 1961 interrogation transcript, cross-referencing it with Simmons' handwritten notes, and marking inconsistencies between the statement and witness timelines. The team agreed to divide the work into 3 tracks. Lang would re-examine all physical evidence using modern DNA technology. Torres would recover and digitize every document, photograph, and scene diagram to build an electronic database. Weller would handle the legal review and compare the declined 1961 prosecution file to identify weaknesses in the original evidence. At the end of the meeting, Hale summarized, Priority 1, reconstruct the complete timeline of the morning of June 14, 1961, and account for every unexplained gap. A detailed action plan was printed that afternoon, assigning tasks, deadlines, and reporting protocols. Lang set up a temporary lab in the county's local facility to process new samples. Torres converted all original photographs to digital format and adjusted contrast to reveal details. Weller contacted the state archives to obtain financial and material purchase records for Moore Motors from 1960-1961. Over the next 3 days, every document was scanned, indexed, and stored on a secure server. Hale required every discovery to be entered into the shared system with timestamps for easy verification. The atmosphere in the room gradually shifted from quiet solemnity to focused intensity. The old papers, Simmons' faded handwriting, the dusty black and white images, once forgotten, were now illuminated under the cold light of new technology. When the final meeting of the week ended, Hale looked up at the whiteboard that read in large marker letters, C-6103, Cold Case, Review Phase. Beneath it, in firm strokes, he added one more line. Re-examine 1961 evidence, every detail, every trace, nothing overlooked. On September 24, 2013, following Sheriff David Hale's directive, Cold Case Unit C-6103 proceeded to the next phase, re-examination and testing of all original 1961 physical evidence. The 3 metal crates were unsealed in the Athens County Laboratory in the presence of BCI Columbus representatives and a state prosecutor. Dr. Peter Lang personally inspected the condition of each evidence bag and recorded the entire process on digital video. All seals remained intact. The red wax was brittle and discolored, but showed no tears or separation. Lang confirmed seal integrity maintained, chain of custody unbroken since 1962. After photographic documentation, the team opened evidence bag #3, containing the hunting knife seized from Daniel Moore's residence. The carbon steel blade had lost its shine, the wooden handle was slightly cracked, and dark residue still clung to the guard area. Using modern DNA extraction methods, Lang carefully scraped a microscopic sample from the handle groove. The sample was processed in a sterile hood using EDTA solution and specialized enzymes. 2 days later, the lab reported that although the mitochondrial DNA yield was low, it was sufficient for comparison with Charlotte Moore's 2013 reference profile. The result showed a 99.8% match, confirming the DNA on the knife belonged to Charlotte. Lang immediately signed the report, coded forensic match, specimen knife 1961. Victim DNA confirmed. For the first time in the 52 years since the case began, a physical item was conclusively linked to the victim. Simultaneously, technician Julia Torres examined evidence bag #5, containing the small soil sample recovered from the knife blade in 1961. The sample was removed from its glass vial, dried, ground, and compared via differential infrared spectroscopy with soil collected from the Route 33 oil drum burial site. The BCI Columbus Geology Lab confirmed a significant mineral match: high calcium content, fine sand and cement grit. Characteristic of soil mixed with industrial concrete, rare in residential areas, but common around the Athens industrial zone in the early 1960s. A 94% similarity index was considered strong evidence of common origin. Torres completed the report, stating, "Soil residue on knife consistent with soil matrix recovered from oil drum burial site, Route 33. Peter Lang reviewed all accompanying 1961 documentation, cross-checked original evidence tags signed by Sheriff Simmons, and confirmed no discrepancies. He ordered additional gas chromatography on the thin oil film on the blade. Results identified it as SAE40, the exact type used by Moore Motors and matching the oil recovered from the drum. This third data point strengthened the chain of connection. In the consolidated report sent to Hale that afternoon, Lang wrote, "Evidence re-examination confirms physical connection between knife and victim remains. Soil and oil traces consistent, DNA match positive. Integrity of 1961 evidence intact." Hale read the report in the command room. The words "positive DNA match" caused the room to fall silent for several seconds. Julia Torres continued scanning the old fingerprint lifts from 1961 evidence bags and glass plates. Under green spectrum light, she discovered a previously unmarked latent print on the knife handle edge. The pattern, a whorl with ridge spacing consistent with male characteristics, was highly likely to belong to Daniel Moore. Although not of sufficient quality for legal comparison, the finding was separately noted in the technical log. Sarah Weller, observing the entire process, created a new summary table: DNA victim confirmed, soil and oil match, latent male print partial. All information was entered into the Ohio Cold Case Database under new case number C-6013R1. By the end of the day, Lang resealed the items after taking supplementary samples, applied new seals, and signed re-examined 2013 BCI certified. Sheriff Hale recorded in the log, "Evidence reopened and verified. Chain of custody confirmed. Probative link established between original exhibits and recovered remains." In the late afternoon, Sunlight streamed through the laboratory window and glinted off the old knife blade inside its glass case, a silent piece of evidence for half a century. Now the crucial link joining two eras of investigation in Athens, Ohio. On September 26, 2013, after completing the physical evidence re-examination, Cold Case Unit C-60-103 shifted focus to analyzing 1961 administrative and financial records to establish any transaction chain related to the purchase of materials used in the disposal. Legal consultant Sarah Weller directly contacted the Ohio State Archives to obtain microfilm copies of Moore Motors invoices from April through July 1961. 3 days later, digital scans arrived in Athens. Julia Torres and Peter Lang reviewed every line, cross-referencing them with the old materials ledger seized during the original search. 2 invoices stood out. One dated June 9 for 20 gallons of SAE-40 industrial oil from Inland Petrochemical, and another dated June 12 for 8 94-pound bags of Portland cement from Athens Supply Company. Both invoices bore lot number, Lot 24B. The exact marking found on the lid of the drum, excavated at Route 33. The discovery was recorded as document cross-reference DCR 61-2013. Lang immediately checked the Moore Motors warehouse description records and confirmed a Lot 24B was received on June 13. 1 day before Charlotte Moore vanished. Subsequent outbound records showed no corresponding usage of that oil or cement for vehicle maintenance that week, indicating the extra materials were not used in regular business. Weller summarized in her report, invoice Lot 24B purchased 2 days prior to disappearance. Serial matches recovered drum. No business record of usage. At the same time, Hale ordered a full review of Daniel Moore's original 1961 statements, typed in the master file and preserved on microfilm. When compared with witness statements from Frank Heller and Mary Duvall, the unit identified multiple inconsistencies. Daniel claimed the morning meeting with Charlotte was normal, no argument, and that she left alone around 8:40. Yet Heller saw both enter the office together and never saw Charlotte exit. Duvall heard arguing and crashing sounds around 8:45. Additionally, Daniel told police the cement patch behind the garage was repaired early in the week, but the cement invoice was dated June 12, only 2 days before the meeting. Weller noted internally, statement inconsistent with purchase date, post hoc explanation unlikely. Peter Lang compared the 1961 cement evidence description with 2013 excavation photos and confirmed the thickness matched the recovered sample, establishing a physical link between Moore Motors materials and the Route 33 site. Presenting findings to Hale, he concluded, sequence of transactions strongly implies preparation and concealment. Julia Torres added a detail to the statistical table. Both suppliers, Inland Petrochemical and Athens Supply Company, were within a 5-mile radius of Moore Motors, and delivery was marked same day, consistent with Daniel transporting the materials himself in the dealership's small truck. All data was entered into the cold case database with attached invoice images and a map locating both suppliers. At the end of the session, Hale and Weller reviewed the timeline: June 9 and 12 purchases, June 13 warehouse receipt, June 14 meeting with Charlotte, after which she was never seen again. Every marker aligned, forming a logical sequence of preparation, action, and disposal. Weller closed her internal memo with a concise, dry sentence: document evidence aligns with physical evidence, narrative discrepancy confirmed. 1961 statements by Daniel Moore contained demonstrable falsehoods. Sheriff Hale signed the minutes, stamped verified, then quietly closed the file, knowing the scattered pieces of 50 years were finally connecting into a complete picture. On September 28, 2013, after completing the financial records and 1961 statements analysis, Cold Case Unit C-60-103 moved to reconstructing the probable transport route used to move the oil drum containing the body from Moore Motors to the Route 33 burial location. Technician Julia Torres handled the map data compilation. She retrieved the 1960 Athens cadastral survey from the state archives, photographing the entire West Side industrial area where the old Moore Motors garage stood. The map revealed only two feasible routes from the garage to what later became Route 33. Industrial Road 4 through the old materials yard, and a dirt access road connecting to an abandoned concrete dumping ground where businesses routinely disposed of industrial waste at the time. Simultaneously, Peter Lang used 2013 satellite data to pinpoint the exact excavation coordinates, calculating the distance from the garage to the drum discovery point as 0.41 miles, 660 meters. Overlaying the 1960 survey with modern GPS data produced near-perfect alignment. The old dirt road, though later paved over during Route 33 expansion, was still visible on infrared imagery as a compressed strip running straight from behind Moore Motors to the edge of the burial area. Lang noted, historic access route verified, spatial correlation confirmed. Sarah Weller added supporting evidence. 1961 property records showed the dumping ground was temporarily licensed to Moore Motors as waste material storage until the end of that year. Explaining why the drum was buried precisely within land Daniel Moore controlled. The team ran a 3D crime scene reconstruction simulation. Torres entered elevation data, terrain structure, and old warehouse locations. The software showed that moving a 1.4-meter metal drum by small truck at night was entirely feasible, requiring roughly 10 minutes via the rear exit without using main roads. Lang observed that given the mixed cement and oil residue on the drum, Daniel likely poured the concrete in the garage, allowed partial setting, then buried it the same night before full hardening. The 3D model revealed the 2013 drum location exactly matched the 1961 city engineering concrete dumping area, noted on a 15000 scale map. That section had been filled with industrial material in May 1961, just weeks before the disappearance. This reinforced the theory that the burial site was not random, but in an area Daniel regularly accessed for work. Hale ordered precise remeasurement of all distances between old and new maps and produced a detailed route diagram. The large printed map hung on the command board, marked in red, Moore Motors rear exit concrete dump, Route 33 point. Along the route, Torres noted visual obstructions and possible stopping points based on period aerial photos and street lighting records. Summarizing the data, Hale stated, the only practical route executable in under half an hour, entirely within the suspect's control. In the report to the state prosecutor's office, Peter Lang wrote, topographical and historical data confirm continuity between Moore Motors premises and burial site. No alternate route offers comparable concealment or access convenience. Sarah Weller added the legal conclusion, spatial evidence substantiates premeditation and familiarity with disposal site. The report was coded Route Reconstruction Report, FIR 33/2013, and filed electronically. As the meeting ended, the team looked at the wall map where two eras, Athens 1961 and Athens 2013, overlap perfectly, the red line connecting the old garage to the highway shoulder. Like a thin but sharp stitch, binding half a century of silence, with a journey less than a mile long, yet long enough to bury a life and a case forgotten for more than 50 years. On September 30, 2013, while reviewing the list of individuals connected to Daniel Moore in 1961, legal consultant Sarah Weller discovered a name mentioned only in passing in Sheriff Simmons' notes, Alicia Benton, acquaintance of DM. The note had never been followed up because Alicia left Ohio before the original investigation was suspended. State records showed Alicia Benton, born 1935, had worked as an accountant at a Columbus dealership and had a close relationship with Daniel Moore in early 1961. Weller coordinated with the Arizona Civil Records Office, where Daniel later settled, and located Alicia living in Tucson at age 78, in stable health. On October 3, Sheriff Hale signed authorization for a federal local team to contact her and take a formal recorded statement. The interview took place at her residence, attended by BCI Columbus and a state prosecutor. Alicia was lucid, cooperative, and confirmed she had known Daniel Moore through a small business association in Athens in early 1961. They met several times and maintained a close friendship until mid-June. In her statement, she recalled the morning of June 14, 1961, when she ran into Daniel at the Riverbend gas station while filling up before driving to Columbus for work. He was driving the small truck with a large oil drum in the back. I asked why he was hauling it himself instead of using an employee. Daniel just smiled and said, "I have to do it myself. I have to finish this today." At the time, she assumed he was referring to wrapping up a lingering repair contract and thought nothing more of it. She left the station around 8:30 a.m. Daniel headed west toward the industrial area. The exact route, linking Moore Motors to the future, Route 33 concrete dump. The quote, "I have to finish this today," was recorded verbatim and flagged, direct quote, subject statement. Weller cross-referenced the statement with the established timeline. Charlotte arrived at Moore Motors at 8:15. Daniel left the garage in the truck around 10 o'clock, and an identical drum was later found buried at Route 33. Peter Lang immediately compared Alicia's description: drum roughly shoulder height, old silver paint, round welded lid, with the excavated drum's dimensions and features. They matched perfectly. When asked if she noticed anything else unusual, Alicia mentioned a strong oil smell and wet cement streaks on the drum sides. All details were documented in a supplementary forensic memo coded Supplementary Testimony, AB 2013. Witness identity was verified against residence records, driver's license, and signature fully valid. The interview lasted over 2 hours and was fully audio and video recorded. After completion, Weller transmitted the 17-page transcript and video back to Athens. During the October 5 internal briefing, Hale played the video for the task force. The room fell silent as the elderly woman clearly recounted seeing the oil drum. Her voice remained steady. Lang concluded, testimony, consistent with all physical and documentary evidence, independent verification of oil drum transport, morning of June 14, 1961. Hale nodded and noted, statement credible, corroborates timeline. Julia Torres entered the information into the cold case database, flagged witness re-established 2013, corroborative. In the consolidated report to the state prosecutor, Weller wrote, Alicia Benton confirms Daniel Moore transporting oil drum on morning of victim's disappearance, remarking intent to finish this today. Testimony aligns with material evidence and route reconstruction. At the end of the session, as documents were printed and filed, Hale read the final line of the report. Statement fits the chain of evidence and strengthens the theory of premeditation, deliberate action. In the dim light of the command room, the scattered facts of more than half a century were finally connected by the memory of a surviving witness, one whose recollection was clear enough to fill the last remaining gap in that fateful June morning of 1961. On October 8, 2013, after completing the verification of witness Alicia Benton's statement, Task Force C-60-103 shifted focus to investigating Daniel Moore's cash flow around the time of the disappearance, with the goal of identifying expenses potentially linked to the purchase of materials and transportation of the oil drum. Legal advisor Sarah Weller contacted Athens County Savings and Loan directly, the bank where Moore Motors had held both business and personal accounts. All records from the 1960s had been transferred to microfilm and stored at the Ohio Financial Archives Center. After 3 days of searching, the BCI Columbus technical team located real ACS 61 June, containing detailed transaction copies for Daniel Moore in June 1961. A digital copy was sent back to Athens for analysis. When the microfilm images were enlarged, the faint typewritten entry remained legible. Withdrawal, 500.00 USD, June 15, 1961. Cash, teller number 4. Below it was the handwritten signature D. Moore. Weller cross-referenced it with Moore Motors payroll ledger for the same period, and discovered this was the only withdrawal over $100 in the entire second quarter of 1961. The withdrawal date, June 15th, was just one day after Charlotte Moore was reported missing. The transaction copy was printed and labeled Bank Record Exhibit BR 6115 June. When compared with the invoice data extracted from Athens Supply Company, the team found the total listed price of the material lot was $487.60, virtually identical to the amount Daniel withdrew. Peter Lang created a comparison chart with the note, Transaction Coincidence, 500 withdrawn the 15th of June. Purchase materials valued $487.60 same week. Hale ordered a check for any legitimate reason. Daniel would withdraw cash instead of paying from the business account. According to Weller's report, Daniel's personal account maintained a balance of approximately $2,300, while the business account held $1,800, and no other large expenses were recorded that week. There were no payroll, tax, or vehicle purchases falling in that period. In the bank's confirmation letter, the teller had handwritten, "Customer requested cash for private use." The money was never redeposited or recorded in Moore Motors books. Lang concluded this was evidence of off-the-books spending, most likely to pay for the rental or transportation of materials. The transaction analysis results were presented at the internal meeting on the morning of October 10th. Julia Torres displayed the enlarged microfilm image on screen, the signature D. Moore slanted slightly right, bold ink strokes, identical to the specimen signature on the 1960 business registration file. Sarah Weller read the report summary. Cash withdrawal recorded one day after disappearance, matching cost of oil drum materials. No business justification identified. Hale concluded firmly. Financial correlation established, post-event transaction supports concealment expenses. The formal report was drafted the same day, coded Financial Analysis Report, FAR 2013-61, 8 pages long, with attached microfilm copies, material invoices, and a 1961 market price compilation provided by the State Statistics Office to confirm value correlation. In the conclusion section, Weller wrote, "The cash withdrawal made by Daniel Moore on June 15, 1961, for the amount of $500 corresponds directly to the estimated cost of cement, oil, and industrial materials used for the drum found at Route 33. No record of legitimate business expense exists." Hale reviewed it, stamped verified evidence link, and added a handwritten note, "Post-incident financial activity, consistent with concealment pattern." This final financial trail, combined with the witness testimony and prior physical evidence, allowed Task Force C-60-103 to complete the financial picture of the case, an essential piece proving that the purchase of materials, transportation, and burial was not a spontaneous act, but a calculated series of actions prepared and paid for immediately after the victim disappeared. Matching every fact in the 1961 file, they were painstakingly reconstructed after more than half a century. On October 15, 2013, after nearly a month reviewing all evidence and finalizing the financial report, Task Force C-60-103 transferred the complete investigation results to the Ohio Attorney General's office for the next legal steps. Chief Prosecutor William Grady, who had originally reviewed the 1961 case, was now retired. The file went to his successor, Prosecutor Marianne Kessler, head of the Cold Case Prosecution Unit. After examining the DNA reports, physical evidence results, financial records, route reconstruction, and witness statement from Alicia Benton, Kessler concluded that the chain of evidence met the probable cause standard, sufficient reasonable grounds to establish Daniel Moore's direct involvement in Charlotte Moore's death. On October 17, she formally signed a 42-page probable cause affidavit outlining the key points. One victim DNA matched the sample on the hunting knife seized in 1961. 2 soil and oil samples on the knife matched the recovery site. 3 financial records and material invoices matched the batch number stamped on the burial drum. 4. A living witness confirmed Daniel transported an oil drum on the morning of the disappearance. 5. The suspect's 1961 statements contradicted witness accounts and the material purchase timeline. The affidavit was coded Affidavit 13 BCI CCU 07 and filed the same day with the Athens County Court of Common Pleas. On the morning of October 18, Judge Harold Merritt presided over an emergency review hearing. Under Ohio Revised Code Section 2903-01, intentional killing with subsequent body concealment is classified as murder in the first degree. After hearing the summary presentation and reviewing the full evidence file, the judge signed arrest warrant number AR 2013-1487, authorizing the apprehension and extradition of Daniel Moore, born 1929, last known residence Prescott, Arizona. The 4-page warrant, bearing the raised seal of the Ohio Supreme Court and accompanied by an old photograph and physical description of the suspect, stated, to be executed by the Sheriff of Yavapai County, Arizona, under the Uniform Criminal Extradition Act. That same afternoon, Sheriff David Hale received a copy of the warrant, filed it, and transmitted it electronically through federal systems to the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office and Arizona State Police. The warrant was entered into the NCIC database under identifier 230HO1961 with status active, homicide warrant. The task force also sent a 14-page summary to Arizona authorities, including side-by-side photographs of Daniel Moore from old records and his current driver's license. Arizona police confirmed they had located the suspect's address in the Prescott Valley residential area, where he lived with his son and daughter-in-law. On October 20th, the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office confirmed receipt of the official warrant and scheduled a coordinated arrest. That same day, Hale held a closed-door press briefing attended by BCI and state prosecutor representatives. He read the internal statement. After 52 years, the Charlotte Moore case has reached probable cause threshold. The state of Ohio hereby authorizes the arrest of Daniel Moore for murder in the first degree. During the briefing, Sarah Weller reviewed the timeline again, stressing that every piece of evidence came from original 1961 records, contained no subjective inference, and was fully lawful for interstate transfer. That night, the court transmitted an electronic copy of the warrant via the federal justice system and mailed the certified paper original overnight to Arizona. On October 22nd, at 8:30 Arizona time, warrant AR 2013-1487 status was updated to executed pending confirmation. Sheriff Hale saw the notification flash on his screen, the blinking NCIC entry signaling that a journey of more than half a century had reached the point of no return. A case forgotten since 1961 was officially reignited by an Ohio arrest warrant, bearing a fresh seal, yet carrying the shadow of the old handwritten words in the file labeled Charlotte Moore. On the morning of October 23, 2013, at 7:45 a.m. Arizona time, the sky over Prescott Valley was clear and calm when 2 Yavapai County Sheriff Patrol units and Arizona State Police representatives entered the Willow Creek neighborhood where Daniel Moore resided. Ohio issued arrest warrant AR 2013-1487 had been validated through NCIC. The 3-officer team, led by Lieutenant Mark Cafferty, approached the single-story white wooden house at the end of the street. When they knocked, Daniel, now 84 years old, opened the door in his pajamas, appearing surprised but not panicked. Cafferty showed his badge and read the warrant clearly. Daniel Moore, you are under arrest for the murder of Charlotte Moore, committed in the state of Ohio in June 1961. He paused, then read the full Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. Daniel nodded and said quietly, I understand. 2 officers handcuffed him and confirmed identity against residence documents. There was no resistance, only prolonged silence throughout the procedure. His son and daughter-in-law, present at the scene were asked to step away while the team conducted a brief security sweep of the house. They seized some personal documents, passport, and medical papers, but no property. The arrest report was completed at 8:12 a.m., signed by Lieutenant Cafferty, and witnessed by Officer Linda Ramos. Daniel was escorted outside and placed in the patrol car. Early sunlight reflected off the vehicle door onto the pale but composed face of the white-haired old man. The convoy drove 3 miles to the Prescott Valley Police Station, where he received a medical check and was fingerprinted. There, an Arizona state prosecutor representative read the extradition acknowledgement under the Uniform Criminal Extradition Act and explained his right to request a hearing before transfer to Ohio. He signed the voluntary extradition waiver dated October 23. The signature was slightly shaky but legible. At 10:05 a.m., the Yavapai County Sheriff called Ohio to report the suspect was in custody without incident. A confirmation fax, arrest executed, subject in custody, extradition consented, was sent to Sheriff David Hale's office in Athens, Ohio. The news spread quickly within BCI and the task force. When Hale received the call, he said only, "It's done." On October 24th, Daniel was transferred to the federal holding facility in Phoenix to await the extradition flight. 2 Ohio officers, Captain Mark Hollis and federal agent Karen Duvall, flew to Arizona to take custody. The formal transfer paperwork was signed on the morning of October 26 at Phoenix International Airport, witnessed by a U.S. Department of Justice representative. Daniel, in stable health and wearing a gray jacket, was escorted onto the plane with light front handcuffs for medical reasons. Flight 472 landed in Columbus at 3:20 p.m. local time. A BCI convoy was waiting and transported the suspect under discreet escort to the Athens County Detention Center. As the vehicles passed through the Athens suburbs, golden autumn fields glowed in the sun, and only a few residents paused to watch the slow-moving line of police cars. 52 years after the morning Charlotte Moore vanished, the last man who saw her alive was brought back to where the story began. At 5:10 p.m., the receipt log was signed between Captain Hollis and Sheriff Hale, marking completion of extradition. Hale signed the final line, subject Daniel Moore, 84, arrested Prescott, Arizona, extradited under warrant AR 2013-1487, now in custody of Athens County, Ohio. As the detention cell door closed, yellow light fell across the bold printed text on the warrant taped to the door. State of Ohio v. Daniel Moore, murder in the first degree. On the morning of October 27, 2013, after intake processing at the Athens County facility, Daniel Moore was transferred to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation headquarters in Columbus for formal federal process interrogation. The interview room was standard, wide-angle camera, synchronized audio, and 2 investigators, Captain Mark Hollis, who had escorted him, and veteran investigator Ray Coleman, formerly a protege of the late Sheriff Simmons. Daniel, age 84, was permitted his reading glasses and a glass of water. He sat straight, hands clasped, expression calm to the point of being unreadable. Hollis began by rereading constitutional rights and confirming the suspect understood the reason for arrest. Daniel nodded and answered briefly, "Yes, I understand." After signing the acknowledgement, Coleman opened the file, turned to the photograph of the excavated drum from Route 33, and placed it in front of him. "Do you recognize this object?" Coleman asked. Daniel looked for a long time, then replied softly, "Looks like an old industrial drum. We used to have plenty of those." Hollis followed up, explaining the drum was recovered, containing the remains of his ex-wife Charlotte Moore. Daniel remained silent, staring at the photo. After several minutes he whispered, "It wasn't supposed to happen that way. It was an accident." The investigators exchanged glances. Coleman leaned forward and asked him to explain. Daniel began speaking slowly in a low voice. That morning she came to talk. We argued. She got angry, slipped near the car, hit the floor. I panicked. When Coleman asked why he didn't call for help, Daniel said he was afraid of being blamed and wanted to bury it quietly. Hollis paused, opened another folder, and placed before him the photo of the hunting knife, whose DNA matched Charlotte. If it was just an accident, why is her DNA on the blade of the knife police seized from your house? Daniel looked down at the table in silence. Coleman continued, the soil on the knife matches the burial site. The oil matches the type in your garage. You say accident, but every piece of evidence shows you prepared everything in advance. Daniel looked up, eyes slightly red, voice quieter. You wouldn't understand. Things were different back then, Coleman asked. Different how? He did not answer. He simply crossed his arms and stared into space. Hollis noted, subject evasive. After 15 minutes of silence, Coleman activated the projector and displayed the reconstructed route from Moore Motors to Route 33, detailing the 0.41-mile distance, transport time, and Alicia Benton's statement that she saw Daniel hauling an oil drum that morning. Mrs. Benton says, you told her you had to finish this today. Do you remember saying that? Daniel closed his eyes, then nodded slightly. I said that, yes. But I meant the fight, the divorce, not this. Coleman showed the additional photo of the silver necklace engraved CM, recovered with the remains. Daniel looked at it, his hand trembling slightly, and whispered, she wore it every day. Hollis noted, emotional reaction, verbal acknowledgement of ownership. When Coleman asked one final time, do you deny using the oil drum and cement to conceal the body? Daniel shook his head. I did what I thought was the only way to protect her reputation. The town was small. I didn't want them to talk. The room fell silent. Hollis stopped the recording, confirmed rights had been read, and the statement was voluntary. After a 10-minute break, they resumed evidence review. Coleman presented the 99.8% DNA match between Charlotte and the knife sample, plus Dr. Lang's conclusion that the cement layer in the drum contained the same materials. Daniel purchased 2 days before the disappearance. When asked if he disputed the findings, Daniel replied, no, I can't argue with science. Hollis continued, so you acknowledge the person in the drum was Charlotte Moore? Daniel took a deep breath, looked down, then said softly, yes. Coleman immediately documented it in writing and read aloud. Suspect confirms victim identity. But when asked to sign a formal confession, Daniel looked up, eyes cold and distant. It was an accident, that's all I'll say. He folded his arms and refused further questions. The report noted, subject invoked right to remain silent. The interrogation lasted 3 hours and ended at 12:35 p.m. Captain Hollis signed Miranda, upheld, partial admission recorded. As the two investigators left the room, Daniel remained seated, staring at the necklace photo, face expressionless. In the hallway, Hale was waiting and received the summary. Indirect admission, refused to sign confession, claims accident. Hale simply nodded and said quietly, it's enough. The silence says the rest. Inside the room, the camera continued running, capturing the moment Daniel lowered his head, his aged hands resting on the cold steel table beneath the cover of the file that read, State of Ohio Vith Daniel Moore. On October 30th, 2013, 3 days after the formal Columbus interrogation, the Ohio Attorney General's office completed compilation of the full prosecution file charging Daniel Moore with murder in the first degree under Ohio Revised Code, Section 2903-01. The file, directly overseen by Prosecutor Mary Ann Kessler, totaled over 800 pages, including DNA reports, physical evidence analysis, witness statements, financial records, and the recorded interrogation transcript with translation of the suspect's statements. In the indictment introduction, Kessler stated that the chain of scientific evidence, independent witness testimony, and post-offense conduct satisfied all elements of premeditated murder with concealment of evidence. The document asserted that Daniel Moore's claim of accident lacked any basis because his subsequent actions, purchasing materials, sealing the drum, burying it in an industrial area, demonstrated clear intent to destroy evidence. On the morning of October 31st, the draft indictment proposal, State of Ohio versus Daniel Moore, was filed with the Athens County Court of Common Pleas, along with a request to convene a grand jury. A 12-member grand jury was urgently impaneled on November 2nd. During the closed hearing that lasted over 5 hours, Prosecutor Kessler summarized the case timeline from 1961 to the 2013 body recovery, showed crime scene photos from Route 33, DNA results, and Alicia Benton's statement. BCI forensic expert Peter Lang was called as an expert witness and explained the evidence chain and matching DNA, soil, oil, and cement results under oath, confirming all 1961 samples remained sealed and untampered. Kessler read aloud the final Columbus Lab conclusion: the evidence is consistent with intentional concealment of homicide. After the presentation, the grand jury viewed excerpts from the October 27th recorded interrogation in which Daniel said, "It wasn't supposed to happen that way, it was an accident," and when asked if the person in the drum was Charlotte Moore, answered, "Yes." Kessler froze the frame on that moment, turned to the panel and said, 52 years later, he still chooses silence over truth, but silence cannot erase what science has proven. After nearly 2 hours of private deliberation, the grand jury voted 11-1 to approve the indictment as proposed by the state. The decision was signed and sealed at 4:10 p.m. on November 2, 2013, formally moving the case to the prosecution phase. The Athens County Court immediately issued an order of indictment, charging defendant Daniel Moore with murder in the first-degree Class A felony and specifying 4 counts: premeditated murder, mutilation of a corpse, obstruction of justice, and providing false statements to authorities. The indictment was forwarded to the Athens County Sheriff's Office with an order of no bail. That same afternoon, Sheriff David Hale received court notification and announced briefly at the internal meeting, "Grand jury has spoken. The indictment stands." In the administrative file, Prosecutor Kessler wrote the final line: "All elements of premeditation, concealment, and material evidence support first-degree charge." BCI transferred all physical evidence to court storage under Code Exhibit Series 61 2013. An electronic copy of the indictment was sent to court-appointed defense counsel Henry Lowell, a specialist in cold cases, for preparation of the defense. Daniel Moore was moved to an isolated senior inmate cell at the Central Columbus Detention Facility. Local media published the first official stories in over half a century. Headline: Cold Case from 1961 Reopens. Athens man indicted for wife's murder. In the prosecutor's office, as she signed final confirmation of the completed prosecution file, Kessler paused her pen, looked out the window at sunset falling over the old buildings, then added by hand the last line: "The past does not forget. Justice proceeds." It was 5:46 p.m., November 2, 2013. The Charlotte Moore case, after 52 years, officially entered the criminal trial phase, marking the end of Ohio's half-century-long investigation. The trial, in the case of State of Ohio vs. Daniel Moore, officially opened at the Athens County Court of Common Pleas, temporarily seated in Columbus, on December 9, 2013, amid intense media and public attention. More than half a century after Charlotte Moore vanished, Courtroom 4, normally reserved for minor civil matters, had been reconfigured with dedicated press seating, rows for reporters, and representatives from the Bureau of Criminal Investigation (BCI). Presiding was Judge Eleanor Strauss, a jurist with more than 20 years of criminal trial experience. Daniel Moore, age 84, appeared in a light gray suit, his hair snow white, walking slowly with a slight tremor in his hands, yet still composed. He sat flanked by his 2 court-appointed defense attorneys, Henry Lowell and Thomas Green. The prosecution was led by Mary Ann Kessler, supported by BCI investigators and forensic experts Peter Lang and Laura Chen. The trial began with routine identity verification, followed by the selection of a 12-person jury, mostly residents of the Columbus and Athens areas, with no connection to the case. When Prosecutor Kessler rose to deliver her opening statement, the courtroom fell completely silent. She spoke slowly and firmly. This case is not only about a murder, it is about a promise broken, a truth buried in oil and cement, and a silence that lasted 52 years. She briefly outlined the timeline. Charlotte Moore disappeared on June 14, 1961. Her remains were recovered in September 2013, and the entire chain of physical, financial, and witness evidence pointed to one man, Daniel Moore. Following the opening, the prosecution presented its scientific evidence. Forensic expert Peter Lang took the stand first. He displayed DNA analysis results on screen, comparing bone samples from the victim with residue recovered in 1961 from a hunting knife. The graph showed a perfect match at 16 DNA loci. Lang stated clearly, there is a 99.8% probability that the biological material on the knife belongs to Charlotte Moore. He explained the evidence storage protocol. The knife, gloves, and oil-stained clothing had been sealed in 1961 and kept in BCI's climate-controlled Columbus warehouse with no signs of tampering. When Kessler asked whether the chain of custody had ever been broken, Lang answered unequivocally, no, the chain of custody is intact from 1961 to 2013. Next, Dr. Laura Chen, director of Ohio's Forensic Biology Laboratory, presented mitochondrial DNA results from the remains, confirming a 99.9% match with the victim's daughter, Linda Moore. She concluded, scientific evidence leaves no doubt. The remains found in Route 33 drum belonged to Charlotte Moore. During the video portion, jurors watched footage of the 2013 excavation in which technicians recovered a silver necklace engraved EM, an item every witness confirmed Charlotte wore daily. After the forensic phase, the prosecution moved to financial evidence. Sarah Weller presented receipts for oil and cement bearing lot number, Lot 24B, matching the marking on the drum lid, along with a microfilm copy of a $500 bank withdrawal on June 15, 1961, signed D. Moore, an amount that exactly matched the cost of the materials. Weller concluded, he bought the means of concealment one day after his wife disappeared. The final prosecution witness was 78-year-old Alicia Benton, whose testimony was played via video, recorded in Tucson, Arizona. She recounted, he said he had to finish this today, and he was hauling a big oil drum on his truck that morning. Her voice trembled slightly. Her eyes sad, but her recollection was firm. The courtroom remained absolutely silent when the recording ended. Prosecutor Kessler rose and addressed the jury. The voice of time does not tremble. It only remembers. Defense attorney Henry Lowell then began cross-examination, arguing that more than half a century had passed, physical evidence could have degraded, and consistent witness statements still failed to prove intent to kill. He said, my client was a man trapped by fear, not malice. He asked the court to consider the passage of time, the defendant's age, and possible memory failure among those involved. When Daniel Moore was given the opportunity to speak, he stood and said weakly, I loved her. It was an accident. I didn't mean for it to go that far. Marianne Kessler immediately countered. And yet, you buried her in cement, Mr. Moore. That is not fear. That is choice. Several people in the gallery lowered their heads. Others stared straight at the defendant in silence. Judge Strauss called for order and directed the prosecution to continue. Peter Lang was recalled to explain why 52-year-old samples remained legally valid. He detailed the chain of custody logs signed by every handler over the decades, with no gaps. He concluded, these items speak because we preserved them to be heard when justice was ready. Kessler thanked him and moved to closing. She displayed a timeline summary. Cement purchased June 12th, delivered June 13th. Charlotte vanished June 14th, $500 withdrawn June 15th, and the drum later buried along Route 33. All corroborated by documents, photographs, and testimony. The jury stared in silence as each date illuminated. Kessler said. Every lie has a date. Every truth has evidence. Today we hold both in our hands. Arguments continued into the evening. At 6:20 p.m., Judge Strauss adjourned for the day and sent the jury to deliberate. As people filed out, neon lights reflected off the polished floor where Daniel Moore's wooden chair still sat, slightly tilted. In the hallway, Marianne Kessler closed her briefcase, quietly removed her glasses, and wrote in her notebook. We finally gave Charlotte a voice. Night fell over Columbus. Early winter wind carried the distant sound of church bells as the courtroom doors closed, marking the beginning of the final hours of a case that had waited 52 years for judgment. On the morning of December 10, 2013, as the trial entered its second day, the courtroom was deathly quiet. The jury had just returned from its first night of deliberation, when defense attorney Henry Lowell suddenly requested a private conference with Judge Eleanor Strauss, stating that his client wished to change his plea. After a 10-minute sidebar, the judge summoned the full jury and prosecution to receive additional testimony. Daniel Moore, 84, was helped to the witness stand. He sat, hands trembling slightly, eyes fixed on the judge. His voice was low and hoarse but clear. I want to tell the truth. It's time. The room went still. Only the rapid scratching of the court reporter's pen broke the silence. Daniel spoke in short, measured sentences, as if he had carried them inside for half a century. That morning, June 14th, she came to the garage early. We argued about the divorce. She said she wanted to take the girl and move to Cincinnati. I told her she couldn't do that. She called me a coward. I lost control. He paused, took a deep breath, and clenched his hands. She turned away. I grabbed her arm. She slapped me. And then I pushed her. She fell against the workbench. The wrench fell. She hit her head. There was blood. A lot of it. I froze. His voice broke. He continued that he had shaken Charlotte, but she did not respond. Her breathing grew faint and stopped. I thought she was dead. I didn't think. I just wanted to make it go away, he admitted, dragging her body to the floor, wrapping it in a car tarp, and leaving it in the garage. He had purchased cement and industrial oil on June 12th and prepared an old drum from the shop's scrap pile. I didn't plan it before that day, he said. But once it happened, I knew I couldn't call the police. Everyone in town knew us. I couldn't face that. He described working through the night, pouring cement around the drum, welding the lid, then hauling it in his pickup to the industrial yard west of town. It was dark. I buried her near the concrete piles. I thought no one would ever find her. When Prosecutor Kessler asked, "Do you confirm that you personally mixed the cement, welded the lid, and buried the drum on Route 33? Daniel nodded. Yes. I did all of it myself. He acknowledged cleaning the garage the next morning and replacing the concrete floor where blood had stained it. Kessler displayed crime scene photos of the replaced concrete patch and asked, "Do you recognize this area?" Daniel studied the image and whispered, "Exactly where it was." Forensic expert Peter Lang confirmed that the confession perfectly matched the evidence. The burial location aligned with old Moore Motors property maps. The Portland cement was Lot 24B, purchased June 12, 1961, and the industrial oil in the soil was SAE 40, used in the garage. Asked why he never contacted police, Daniel answered slowly, "I was ashamed. I told myself it was an accident. But every day since then I knew it wasn't. I took her life, then I buried her twice. Once in that drum, and once in my silence." The statement left the courtroom silent. Several spectators lowered their heads. Kessler addressed the jury. 52 years later, he confirms every detail science had already told us. Judge Strauss directed that the full statement be taken under oath. Daniel affirmed it was true and voluntary. The final paragraph read verbatim. "I, Daniel Moore, admit that I caused the death of Charlotte Moore on June 14, 1961, and concealed her body in an oil drum filled with cement near Route 33, Athens, Ohio." Judge Strauss regarded him for a long moment and said softly, "The court acknowledges your statement." Daniel bowed his head, hands resting on the table, eyes closed, and said nothing more. As he was helped back to his seat, Mary Ann Kessler quietly gathered her files and said to a colleague, "The truth waited 52 years for this sentence." The court reporter's notes for that day contained only one line: "Defendant confessed. Statement consistent with forensic findings." On the afternoon of December 11, 2013, after nearly 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned to a courtroom heavy with silence. The door opened. The 12 members filed in, faces grave. Judge Eleanor Strauss asked everyone to rise for the verdict. Foreperson Karen Doyle held the sealed form. Her voice trembled slightly, but remained clear. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Daniel Moore, guilty of murder in the first degree." The words cut through the stillness like a blade. Daniel swayed slightly and closed his eyes. There was no outburst, only a few stifled sighs from the gallery. Prosecutor Kessler bowed her head, hands clasped. Defense attorney Lowell placed a hand on his client's shoulder without speaking. Judge Strauss directed the clerk to record verdict, guilty, unanimous. She thanked the jury for their service, then turned to the defendant. "Mr. Moore, the jury has found you guilty as charged. Before sentencing, do you wish to address the court?" Daniel rose slowly, hands on the wooden rail. His voice was hoarse. "There's not much to say. I've carried this weight for more than half my life. I can't undo it. I can only say I'm sorry, though I know it changes nothing." He turned toward the gallery, where Charlotte's daughter, now in her 50s, sat silently, tears streaming down her face. After a pause, the judge motioned him to sit and began sentencing. She stated that the court had considered the full record, evidence, forensic reports, and the defendant's admission of causing death and concealing the body. The act was deliberate in its concealment, cruel in its execution, and sustained by silence for 52 years. "Justice delayed cannot be justice denied," she said firmly. Under Ohio Revised Code Section 2-903.01, the court imposed the maximum penalty for first-degree murder, life imprisonment without possibility of parole. "It is therefore the judgment of this court that you, Daniel Moore, be sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." Judge Strauss read, each word ringing clear. She asked Daniel to stand for the full pronouncement. He nodded, gaze distant, lips pressed tight. When asked about appeal, Attorney Lowell answered for his client, "No, Your Honor." The record noted, defendant waives right of appeal. After pronouncing sentence, Judge Strauss added, "Mr. Moore, this court recognizes your confession, but remorse cannot erase consequence. Your silence denied Charlotte Moore her voice. This verdict restores it." She then signed and sealed the judgment with the official stamp of the state of Ohio. Daniel was escorted from the courtroom by 2 deputies, walking slowly but without resistance. As he passed the gallery, Linda Moore stood and watched. Their eyes met briefly before he lowered his head and continued. Outside the courtroom, Mary Ann Kessler leaned against the wall, removed her glasses, took a deep breath, and said to Peter Lang, "It's over." Lang replied softly, for her yes. Finally. The final entry in the trial transcript read, "Defendant Daniel Moore, found guilty of murder in the first degree, sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Verdict unanimous." When the courtroom lights went dark, only the silver CM necklace remained in the evidence box, glinting faintly, the last silent testimony of a woman who had waited 52 years to be heard. In January 2014, 3 weeks after sentencing and the formal closure of State of Ohio vs. Daniel Moore at the trial level, Cold Case Task Force C60-103 completed its final case file. Under the direction of Chief David Hale, the Cold Case Unit worked with the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, the FBI, and VICAP, the National Violent Crime Database, to produce the closing report. The 430-page document, coded Final Report, Case C60-103, bore the stamp "Solved" on its cover. The introduction summarized the full timeline from 1961 to 2013, the initial disappearance, preliminary investigation, decades of deadlock, archiving, discovery of the drum en route. 33. Modern DNA testing, reactivation of the cold case, re-examination of evidence, witness verification, and prosecution. The central section detailed forensic findings, with 87 appendices, containing crime scene photos, route maps, DNA comparisons, soil and oil spectrometer reports, bank microfilm, and purchase receipts. Dr. Peter Lang, lead author of the forensic section, concluded, the integrity of evidence preserved since 1961 enabled full reconstruction of the crime sequence with 99% scientific certainty. Technician Julia Torres digitized all records, uploading PDFs to BCI's cloud archive and backing them up to the FBI VICAP server under federal protocol. Legal analyst Sarah Weller wrote the operational review, emphasizing long-term chain of custody preservation. The Moore case demonstrates that chain of custody, when preserved without interruption, can bridge half a century of investigative silence. She noted this was the oldest case in Ohio history resolved entirely through the combination of preserved physical evidence and mitochondrial DNA. 30 pages documented the prosecution process, including arrest warrant AR 2013-1487, the grand jury indictment, the signed confession, and the life without parole sentence signed by Judge Eleanor Strauss. A separate historical context chapter, prepared by the State Judicial Archive, reconstructed 1961 Ohio society and explained the original investigation's failure, absence of DNA technology, legal limitations on prosecution without a body, and personnel changes in local law enforcement. Chief Hale signed the final closure form with the administrative note, all evidence transferred to BCI Central Repository, physical exhibits stored under preservation order until 2063. 2 printed copies were submitted to the Ohio Attorney General and FBI headquarters. The case was entered into VICAP as OAth 1961 Charlotte Moore. At the internal file handover ceremony on January 23, 2014, Hale addressed the team briefly, 52 years, one truth. We did not solve a mystery. We completed a promise. Peter Lang, Julia Torres, and Sarah Weller signed the final page beneath the bold line. Case status, solved. Homicide verified. Offender convicted. The thick gray-silver file was sealed in a moisture-proof archive box, labeled in red, State Archive, do not remove. When the BCI clerk placed it on shelf 12 of the Columbus Central Repository, the fluorescent lights reflected off the small spine label, C6103 Moore, Charlotte, 1961, 2013, closing a journey of more than half a century, in which every fingerprint, every fiber, every grain of soil had patiently waited for its answer. In Hale's duty log, the final entry was a single sentence before he closed the book. Justice can wait, if we don't forget. On February 5, 2014, exactly 52 years and 7 months after Charlotte Moore was reported missing, case C6103 was officially stamped as solved, SUDU closed, under Ohio Cold Case Management Protocol. A small internal ceremony took place in the BCI archive room in Columbus, surrounded by thousands of unsolved files. On the table sat the 400-plus page master file titled State of Ohio Case C6103, Charlotte Moore, Case C6103, Charlotte Moore, 1961, 23rd. Present were Chief David Hale, Dr. Peter Lang, Technician Julia Torres, and legal advisor Sarah Weller. The administrative officer read the order. By authority of the Attorney General of the State of Ohio, the homicide case C6103 is hereby declared solved and closed. All evidence and documentation to remain under state custody. The red "A solved as closed" stamp was applied prominently beside signatures from Hale and State Prosecutor Mary Ann Kessler. Remaining physical evidence, the hunting knife, gloves, CM necklace, DNA reports, and samples of soil, oil, and cement, was sealed one last time in a specialized storage container. Technicians verified barcodes and entered the items manually under the legacy case retention standard. The status line read, Case status closed, solved, no further action required. When procedures were complete, the evidence container was placed in main storage at position at 1244, among other historic Ohio cases. The paper master file was secured separately in the restricted archive, third shelf, labeled Athens County Cold Case. More. Digital backups were transmitted to VICAP and federal servers for future forensic research access. Peter Lang signed the final transfer form and said quietly, "Everything we could learn from her we did." Sarah Weller rested her hand on the file and said to Hale, 52 years, and we finally reached the period at the end of the sentence. Hale said nothing, only took the brass stamp and pressed it firmly onto the last page, leaving a deep red closed. The sound echoed lightly in the metal-walled room, the final affirmation for a once-forgotten case. At 10:45 a.m., Hale signed the state case ledger, Case C-60-103, Charlotte Moore, status, solved, closed, February 5, 2014. Under duration of investigation, the clerk entered 52 years, 7 months, 22 days. The number silenced the room for several seconds. As the team left, the overhead lights reflected off the metal evidence box, glinting like a quiet memorial to the woman who was lost, and to generations of investigators who kept their promise to justice. Outside, February snow lay thin on the BCI roof. Wind scattered fine dust, the way memories of a case finally settle after half a century, yet never completely vanish. On the last page of Hale's administrative log, he wrote only Case C-60-103, Charlotte Moore, solved, justice served after 52 years. He closed the book, set it on the shelf, turned off the light, and walked out. The archive door shut softly, the lock clicking into place, confirming that the longest investigation in Athens County history, the case of Charlotte Moore, 1961, was officially and forever resolved in the memory of the state of Ohio. The story of Charlotte Moore, a woman who vanished from Athens, Ohio, in 1961, is not only the tragedy of one family, it reflects how American society today views justice, memory, and the power of truth. For 52 years, the case lay buried beneath technological limitations, social bias, and human silence. Yet through the persistence of investigators like David Hale, Peter Lang, Sarah Weller, and Julia Torres, combined with advances in mitochondrial DNA, justice was finally served. In a modern world where everything moves quickly and memories are easily replaced by new information, this story reminds us that time cannot erase responsibility, and truth, no matter how deeply buried in oil, cement, and silence, will one day be found. From Daniel Moore quietly hiding his wife's body in an oil drum, to the cold case team, patiently restoring every sample, every cement receipt, every witness statement, the case stands as proof of professional integrity and endurance. It also offers a lesson for contemporary life. In every conflict, marriage, work, or society, silence or concealment is never the answer. Because what is hidden becomes a wound for an entire community. In today's United States, where technology can reconstruct truth from the smallest particle of dust, each of us must live more honestly and carefully with our choices, because in the end, as Hale wrote in his final report, justice can wait if we don't forget. Truth may be delayed, but justice is never lost. Thank you for following the journey to restore justice for Charlotte Moore, a case forgotten for more than half a century, but finally brought to light by people who never gave up. Please subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring real cases together, where the past finds its voice and justice never sleeps.